Why do so many German homes and businesses not have air conditioning, even with temperatures climbing to 40 degrees Celsius and breaking all kinds of records? It's a question that visitors often ask, and several other European countries are the same. The summers are hot. Air conditioning is surely a must. So where is it? Well, it's not that nowhere has air conditioning in Germany, but a lot of places don't. My house doesn't, for example, and that made it quite difficult for me to work up here in this little studio on the upper floor, which is why it's been a while since my last video. I'm willing to put myself through a lot for this channel, but I do draw the line at heat stroke. The hot weather, unsurprisingly, claimed quite a few lives. It also caused roads to partially melt and even prompted the Berlin police to use their water cannons just to give people a chance to cool off for a bit. When we built this house about 12 years ago, we simply didn't think of air conditioning as an option. Why? Because back then, the relatively few hot days we could expect every year didn't make it worth all the trouble and expense. As I said just a few moments ago, this year has seen record high temperatures. That is to say, we've never had temperatures like this before. But you might say, surely even back then we knew about global warming. And yes, we did. Or to give it its more accurate name, climate change. Because in fact, average global temperatures are only rising by a couple of degrees or so. It's just that this tiny rise in temperatures is causing huge changes in weather patterns. So, although by 2012 it was becoming increasingly obvious that the planet was heating up, it was much more difficult to predict exactly how that would change the weather. The climate is a very, very complicated system that scientists don't yet fully understand, although they are learning all the time. To illustrate this, consider that the month of June 2026 gave Germany its hottest temperatures ever, at least since records began. But statistically, it is only the second hottest June on record. Statistics don't often translate easily into reality. It is quite difficult to plan ahead if you don't know exactly what's going to happen. Would we have to prepare ourselves for tropical weather with monsoons? Hotter and drier weather turning our country into a dust bowl? Colder and drier winters? Flash floods? All of the above? None of the above? Back then, that wasn't such an easy question to answer. And we, like so many others, just built our house without some of the features which, in hindsight, might have been useful after all. And with some features which, in hindsight, might have been a mistake, like a gas boiler. But that wasn't the only consideration. We also had a bit of a dilemma to do with electricity consumption. Air conditioning uses a lot of power. Now, I need to point out that I am talking here about classic air conditioning. That is, a system that draws in air, takes the heat out of it, filters it, and regulates its humidity. It is not just a heat pump, but I'll get onto that in a moment. Actual air conditioners use a lot of energy, and here was the dilemma. One thing we knew about climate change back then was that there was a very good chance it was being caused by human activity, specifically our consumption of energy derived from fossil fuels. Air conditioners were seen as particularly power hungry, and in those days, only about 20% of our energy came from renewable sources. That meant that heavy reliance on air conditioning would have actually contributed to the very problem we were trying to mitigate. Contrary to popular belief, by the way, Germany has actually been doing a halfway decent job of transitioning to green energy. At the moment, we're at over 60%, and the government is quite optimistic that it can still achieve its goal of 80% by 2030. In fact, this recent heat wave provided us with more solar energy than normal, so figures show that last weekend we achieved nearly 74%. And that means that things have changed. The weather that makes air conditioning desirable is now able to provide us with the energy that we need for air conditioning. And to that, we can add the very real issue that air conditioning can sometimes have some rather uncomfortable side effects, especially if the units are poorly maintained. Air conditioning can cool you down, but it also dries the air. And that in turn can dry you out, exactly the opposite of what you need in a heat wave. And cold, dry air can make you more susceptible to respiratory diseases like colds. If you sit for too long, too close to a unit, the constant draft can cause stiffness and joint pain. And if your home is also badly ventilated, that can also increase the risk of things like fatigue and nausea, which is also known as sick building syndrome. Of course, if you keep your air conditioning system clean and properly maintained, and you're used to air conditioning, you probably won't have any problems with it. But if you're not used to it, you could very easily get the impression that air conditioning is not for you. On my first ever trip to the United States, walking into my hotel room felt like walking into a fridge. I spent the first half hour trying to work out how to turn the air conditioning down and trying to remember how to convert between Fahrenheit and Celsius. This was in the days before you could just ask your phone to do it for you. So these are just some of the reasons why you can't rely on there being air conditioning in much of Europe. But it's also not the only option. There's also the option of a heat pump. Take our situation. Now, we wouldn't want to have to go to all the trouble and expense of installing a proper multi-split air conditioning system. But we do have a gas boiler that's beginning to show its age and underfloor heating. We could go for a heat pump. Like an air conditioner, a heat pump uses heat exchangers to take heat from one place and move it to another place. Unlike an air conditioner, it usually takes heat from outside the home and uses it to heat water for washing and heating. You wouldn't think that in winter there would be enough heat energy outside to be able to do this, but apparently there is. And although a heat pump does need electricity to drive the compressors and pumps and everything else, it actually extracts more energy than it can actually use. That is, for every kilowatt hour of energy you put in, you can expect to get between 3 and 5 kilowatt hours of energy out. Some types of heat pump have a valve that allows it to be run, as it were, in reverse. In this mode, instead of taking heat from outside the home and using it for the central heating system, it uses the central heating system to take heat from inside the home and transport it away. That is to say, in summer mode, it pumps cold water through the pipes and that cools your house down. It's a lot less hassle to install, it uses a lot less energy, and it avoids the discomfort that people get from air conditioning. So, why don't Germans do that? Well, there are at least 3 problems here. The first is pretty simple. Simply running cold water through your central heating system without dehumidifying the air results in condensation. For us, with our underfloor heating, that could mean wet floors. Secondly, it's not quite as good at cooling as an actual air conditioner. It can probably cool your home by about 6 or 7 degrees Celsius, which is better than nothing. But you still need to take other measures as well, like putting UV blocking film on windows. But perhaps the biggest problem isn't a technical issue at all. It's a textbook example of what happens when you get the messaging wrong. When the previous government started talking about incentivizing people to install heat pumps, they misjudged the tone and made it feel as if they were lecturing people, which is a problem that the Green Party quite often runs into. And then the news media exaggerated this aspect because nothing sells newspapers more than giving people a reason to be angry at the government. The result of that was that people thought they were going to be forced to rip out their old boilers and install heat pumps at their own expense, which wasn't true. But that meant that they resented the idea, and this stigmatized heat pumps for an entire generation. But what all this boils down to is something very simple. Changing long-held attitudes is very difficult, and so it's not something that's likely to happen overnight. And the various options on the table all have advantages and disadvantages, and they cost money. So it's not necessarily an easy decision for an individual to make. But if Europe continues to get warmer and 40-degree heat waves become the norm rather than the exception, then we could see cooling systems of one sort or another also become the norm. That could be air conditioners or heat pumps or some brand new technology that's just about to be invented. Who knows? Before I go, here's another video of mine that you might like to watch.